that feeling of trying something new and being in this state of frustration or feeling like you're not making progress, just keep going at least for a little while and look back on yourself, because you have been making progress and other people are probably seeing it more than you do.
You're listening to the Building a Coaching Culture podcast. If you need to compete and win in the 21st century labor market as an employer of choice, this podcast is for you. Each week, we share leadership development, coaching, and culture development insights from leading experts who are developing world-class cultures in their own organizations. And now, here's your host, J.R. Flatter.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm J.R. Flatter. This is Building a Coaching Culture. And I'm joined as always by my co-host and youngest son, Lucas Flatter.
Hello.
So you're celebrating something, aren't you? What's going on in your life?
Yeah, so just been working towards my master's in business administration and just got the final grades yesterday, so I let everybody know in the family. It's like every time there's a little incremental like nudge towards the goal, I get excited. And so this is leading towards the graduation that's happening this Saturday. So I was just waiting on that last official piece.
So you have an MBA. That's impressive.
Yeah.
MBA, PMP, you're a coach, you're a computer scientist, you're doing it all.
Mm.
So just remind everybody who our listeners are, leaders that are competing and winning in the 21st century labor market. Not a surprise to anyone or a mystery to anyone about how competitive this labor market is. And that culture is so important to that. So one of the themes that I've been seeing is the difficulty people are having at transition stages in their life and how leaders can help with that and how coaches might help with that. So I wondered if we could focus on that for this session, on how building your culture is related to helping people in transitions, and what is the leadership role and what is the person's responsibility, what is our responsibility as the leaders in the organization. So that's what's on my mind today.
Big topic. So do you want to go into how the coaching relationship might help with getting help to a leader that might be at a transition point like that?
Yeah, sure. We could talk about the coaching relationship. We could talk about the leaders and the culture that they develop. And part of what I see changing in the workforce is even things as simple as the orientation conversation, right? For decades, the orientation conversation has been, here's your desk, here's your phone, and here's your laptop, and good luck. But now it seems to be changing. The labor force is expecting a lot more than that. So part of building a 21st century culture is having that 21st century orientation, which is actually helped create by the executive leadership and actually strong participation by executive leadership in that orientation. So if you're in fact building a coaching culture and bringing someone into your organization, I think it would be a very worthwhile thing to talk about. Where are you in your life? Like where you are, you're in a period of transformation. You're in a period of transition. So if you were to join my company, I would want to know that, and I would want to know how to help you through that. So I think that's a big part of being a 21st century leader, having a coaching culture, recognizing and doing something with the fact that a lot of people that are coming our way, there's a lot going on in their life. There's value that we could help them with.
So I kind of just talking about like recruitment and, joining new organizations. You think about some companies like Google and Amazon and the huge ones that they might get like so many applicants that by the time somebody's hired, like they know this is the person that's going to fit this role perfectly. And it seems like, if we have a smaller organization, you kind of have to go in with the expectation that you're going to develop people and kind of like mold them into the role instead of, you don't have the luxury of playing the numbers game.
Yeah, I can't imagine going through that brutal process of 4 or 5, 6 interviews, but they can do it, and good on them for being able to do that. For us, I think we're in a much more competitive place. And I think even the bigs, they're very competitive because they're looking for world-class talent. That's a scarce resource, just like we're looking for that world-class talent. So, yeah, you're not going to know the person as well as you might in that other scenario you painted. And so certainly you have a greater burden when they do arrive and bringing them into the fold and getting to know them and making sure that they're being taken care of. You don't just plop them down on a desk and forget about them.
And if you're in that coaching relationship, how much are you waiting for the leader to say, I'm at a life transition, I need to talk about it? And how much of it is you might just be listening and hearing the hints and cues?
So in a coaching relationship, the leader is in the driver's seat, as we say all the time. And so as the coach, if I have decided this is an opportunity to coach, and in a coaching culture, that would be almost always, because when you're coaching, you're growing the leader. When you're mentoring, you're just telling them how you did it and hoping that it works for them. But so I've decided it's an opportunity to coach. And so I know that the leader that I'm working with is in the driver's seat, but I also am an experienced executive. And I know if you just joined my team, probably there's some turmoil going on in your life. And so you're real happy to get the job, and I'm real happy for you to take the job. That doesn't mean there's not a lot going on in your life that I, as an experienced executive, shouldn't know about and recognize and bring it into the room in our coaching relationship. So when we say that the leader's in the driver's seat, that doesn't mean that I can't use my knowledge, skills, abilities, and experiences to facilitate their own self-discovery. And so how would you bring that into the room in a coaching conversation? I'm a very explicit coach. And so I would just explicitly say, hey, I know you just joined us and you came from here. A lot of the people that we work with are retiring out of military services. And so, hey, I know you just retired out of the military service, and I'm real happy to have you here, but I suspect there's something going on in your life that we could help work through. So I haven't demanded we go in that direction, but I've supposed in my coaching head, my coaching mindset, that there's an opportunity there.
And then we're looking at, hiring and that kind of transition. What other ones that you kind of see, like, in the work environment, whether it's like marriage or a death in the family, or what are those kind of moments that might prompt one of these conversations?
Yeah, I know from my own life experiences, and you're going through it right now. Let's just see in the last 5 years of your life, you've gotten an MBA, gotten married, had a child. Any one of those is a potentially joyful but also stressful time of life. In my own life, so I joined the Marine Corps. That was one of the times. Retired from the Marine Corps another time. As I started this business 20 years ago, then sat in the CEO chair for 15 years, and stepping out of that chair at the same time that, ironically and thankfully, I had accomplished my life's goals. And so 5 years ago was a very traumatic period in my life. And it's about the same time that I started on my coaching journey. I've been coaching all along, but didn't recognize it as coaching or call it coaching. So that was a challenging time for me. And I think that's part of where I began to recognize I needed a coach. And so had the opportunity to get a couple of different coaches, one of them from Australia, another from Ireland, another one from Texas, but Venezuelan by birth. immigrated to the United States. So I had a very eclectic coaching team that I was able to reach out to. I think it might be worthwhile just to talk through that, and how did I recognize and what were the coaches able to do with me and for me, help me grow into what I'm doing today. So if you think about being on this 30-year journey, that you have this laser focus on what you're trying to accomplish, and then suddenly it's there, and simultaneously you're stepping out of a job you've been in for 15 years and leadership of a company that you created. It's a very joyful time, but also there's a lot of questions in your mind. Quite literally, I was just asking myself, who am I now? I know I'm still a father, and I'm still a leader, I'm a coach, I'm an educator, but 55 years old, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And just sitting in an office with a computer in front of me, brainstorming, what's next, can only get you so far. And so my coaches, and in my coaching conversations with them, were able to help me see those blind spots, help me connect dots that I might not otherwise connect. And so now I have a pretty good idea. And that probably went on for about 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't something like overnight, I figured it out. I think, in a coaching relationship, especially one that's relatively short term. So most of the times when we engage in a coaching relationship, we're looking at a 12-week engagement. The most you could hope to do, I think, in that 12 weeks is lay out a blueprint, lay out a plan, because you're certainly not going to have the answers in 12 weeks. So when we engage in a 12-week coaching relationship, we have a pretty focused structure where we talk like things like, what are your principles? What's important to you? What kind of job do you want to have? What kind of work do you want to do? What kind of life do you want to have? A lot of people, when they're in these transition phases, they promised somebody for years, when this happens, we're going to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
So is that one of those times for you? So what's that work family self-balance? And then where do you see yourself in 30 years, 5 years, in 1 year? So we got a pretty practice structure that we use. But even with all of that, it's a blueprint to get to the plan. And that's when you start executing the plan. So for me, from stepping out of the CEO chair and really having some clarity on where I was going, it was 18 months. 18 months of hard work.
Ironically, it's like when you go through one of those experiences, it's like, you've achieved something. So you're looking back and you're proud and, just kind of relax for a minute. But then there's this void ahead of you. Mm-hmm. So it's like a moment to celebrate and reflect, but also like, okay, what's next?
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect time to get a coach. The more I think about it, the more I think we need to get you in a coaching relationship like soon, so you can help walk you through what's next for you. And Lena as well, right? She's graduating from her cybersecurity course, and she's in exactly the same boat. What do I do now?
And I guess thinking about coaching as a way to, you're gaining self-clarity, you're talking things through with yourself. Like, what did you discover in those conversations when you were transitioning?
So each session is a life of its own. And so one of our responsibilities as coaches is to address what I'm concerned about today, but also address what I told you I want to accomplish over the long term and the midterm. And so when I first stepped out of the CEO chair, I thought, I'm going to be a philanthropist. I'm going to start a nonprofit organization, continue working with the Chamber of Commerce, which is a nonprofit, and I'm going to serve others in that capacity. And so I probably went down that path for several months. But the whole time I'm saying in the back of my mind, this just doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem to be what's going to give me joy. And it's about that time where I first hooked up with my coach from Australia. And the very first conversation with her coaching hat on, she's recognizing the inconsistencies of what I'm saying and what's bringing a smile to my face. And so certainly a coach can do that. We always talk about in our coaching accreditation programs that we look for the whispers. And that was a whisper. You're saying you want to be a philanthropist, but the only time I see you get excited is when you talk about winning more business. And so, do you really want to be a philanthropist? So that's a perfect coaching conversation to show you that inconsistency. And also, a good coach will facilitate you to really look at yourself and answer yourself 100% honestly. Because a lot of times we say one thing because we think that's what the world wants to hear. And so a coach can really help you through that. So that's kind of the short term, but in the long term, another thing that we talk about in our coaching accreditation is coach the person, not the problem. And so like most people do, I'm presenting the symptoms of my unhappiness to my coach. And then she's constantly bringing me back to, what does that mean to you? So a perfect coaching question would be, what is it about being a philanthropist that makes sense for you in the next phase of your life? I mean, who are you? One of the exercises we go through is that everybody to build their own individual mission statement. So for 30 years, I knew who I was. A father, a Marine, and interested in the education of my children, interested in my family, growing as a family. Not that any of those things are lessened, but they're all achieved. So now what? Now who am I? And so that's the kind of questions that a coach can really help you with. Not where you're going to go to work in the morning. They can do that. But why would you want to go to work there? And what about going to work there fulfills your own mission statement? So they help me through all of those things. And a coach can help anyone in those kind of transitions.
In the employee-employer relationship, in like true coaching, you might nudge them away from your organization, right? Is that a fear or a pitfall or something that you encourage?
So you've brought up the classic conversation between the CFO and the CEO, right? The CFO is interested in money. And so the CFO asks the CEO, what if we educate them and they leave? And the CEO, who's the strategist of the group, says, what if we don't educate them and they stay?
Mm-hmm.
So you can apply the same logic to coaching. What if you don't care about their personal and professional achievement and they stay? Yeah, I would think in most coaching relationships that I'm in, whether it's at work or more formal coaching relations outside of our company, transitioning into a new job is almost always part of that conversation. But a good leader, a coaching culture leader, would celebrate that. Yeah, you got to replace the person, but when they go out into the world, they're going to tell good stories about you. And that's how your culture gets built. Your culture is the story that people tell about you. The culture is the story the employees tell about you. The culture is the story your employees tell the world about you. And so if you lose someone because you've coached them, personal and professional achievement, you've lost an employee, but you've strengthened your culture. Ironically, the data supports exactly the opposite. We research this kind of thing all the time as social scientists, as scholars of leadership. It's something we're very interested in. And it's counterintuitive. If you educate someone, allow them the opportunity to get an MBA, allow them the opportunity to get a PMP or a cybersecurity certification, they're more likely to stay, even though they're more educated and even though they're more competitive in the marketplace. The fact that you respected them enough to allow them that opportunity will only strengthen their desire to stay. And again, that strengthens your culture. What's the story they're telling their family? I can't possibly leave this company. They treat me so well. What's the story they're telling people who are trying to hire them. Yeah, you're offering me a little bit more money, but why would I leave this amazing company?
You also think about like, you're more happy, but then you're seeing your coworkers and, they're more happy and you're more likely to have those positive experiences. Not even talking to your coach or the CEO anymore, but like on your team.
So let's talk about you a little bit. What's going on in your mind as you're hanging your MBA on your wall next week?
I have been thinking a lot about, what's next. And like I said earlier, it's kind of a moment to say, okay, like, here's what we've done and here's what we're looking back on, which is something to be proud of. But then it's like, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I'm kind of working through that right now.
Who are you talking to as you're working through all that?
So I have been talking with a coach periodically. I met with my mentor from a leadership program that I did a couple of years ago in Leadership Fredericksburg. So we had lunch and was just talking to him about, I'm about to finish this and, you have a similar career. So asking him about his background a little bit and probably do the same with my older brother who's kind of gone through a bunch of the same kind of things as I'm gone through.
Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give to yourself as you go through this transition? If you were coaching you, what would you tell yourself?
Looking back, sometimes when I thought, oh, like this isn't going in the direction that I want, or, not fast enough, or this or that. Now looking back, there's some clarity where it's like, okay, I needed time to do this and I was working through this. And so now I have that understanding of, things that I'm looking back on before. So part of, I would say, if I was giving advice to myself, keep on having those conversations and be aware of like how you're feeling about certain things, but also don't try to rush into anything, or, if you're going to make a big move, just make sure that you've gotten comfortable with it and you're not just doing it to have a snap decision.
So as a millennial with a brand new MBA, a young family, and I'm trying to hire you, what's important to you?
I mean, just having that importance of family and flexibility of, do you need to go pick up your kids or go to a sport, event with them or something like that. So I wouldn't personally want to go to any organization or company that kind of puts so much of a burden on the employees that, you have to make those decisions and say like, this, to keep my job, I need to have the conversation with my wife about, this is the balance that's going to be going forward. Because if I were to go down that route, it would certainly only be like because there's more money involved. But then you think about like, okay, what's the point of that, and what are you going to do with that, and is that worth it? And so I would say for me right now, the time with my family and the comfort of having that flexibility is more important than like, oh, I want to make twice as much money or something.
Yeah, I often wonder, as social scientists, we study cost of leaving. We study what would entice someone away from their current job into a new job. And the further we go into the 21st century, the further I think it's exactly what you just described. When I first started this company, we would lose employees for 10% pay raises. A big thing was no longer had to commute. So we were able to entice people because our business was in Fredericksburg, which is just outside of DC. And if they didn't have to drive to DC anymore, they would take a pay cut. So if you're talking to another employer or potential employer, you just said double the money. I bet you would change jobs for double the money. But what are you and your friends telling each other as far as salary versus your ability to drop Declan off at school in the morning? 20%, 30%, 40%? What are we talking? Is it even something we could put a number on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're probably, it's probably like, if I were to throw out something, it'd be like 30% or something,
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also, if we're talking about like, are you going to go get an opportunity that's different and, potentially more responsibility and this and that, versus if you were in your exact same position. Because if it's the exact same position, or at least a similar one, then I feel like the barrier to leave, the cost of leaving is probably higher just because, okay, what else is in it except for this 20%?
Yeah.
But I guess, that's intangible of like, what would I be doing that might be more satisfying? And I guess that's probably something that a lot of us are thinking, like, what is the grass greener? Like, could I be working with, more exciting projects or something,
So what you've told me in the opposite is what I heard you say in between your sentences. If I have a strong culture, I could save a lot in salary. There's a 30% delta between this job that you have with a strong culture and another equal job that maybe you don't know what the culture is, or you've heard that's not a good culture. It would cost me 30% more to keep you.
Yeah, and I would say, I guess, as long as there's like a baseline of, like standard of living and, depending on inflation and all that, because I wouldn't say that. I don't think anyone you asked would take a pay cut and say like, okay, like, but we're going to have an even better culture, because it's hard
Yeah,
to,
you're right.
as long as we reach this baseline, then it's all gravy kind of.
So if you think about Maslow hierarchy of need, and the bottom tier is the basics of survival, all of those existential things. So you've got those bases covered in your job. And then so the next level is where you begin to talk about culture and the relationships between people and feeling wanted and needed and loved. All of that's the middle tiers of Maslow's hierarchy. So would you say that a 21st century culture delivers those fundamentals as this baseline, and also you have a high expectation of the middle tiers of Maslow's hierarchy?
So you're saying that you should expect like the bottom being like survival and everything, and then have
Yeah,
the
when I think of a
expectation.
20th century culture, I think of somebody going to a job because it provided them the money to eat and have a home to live in. And that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
21st century culture, your expectation as a 21st century MBA is, yeah, you're going to give me those basics, but we're also going to regularly talk about and celebrate those middle tiers. I expect a strong relationship. I expect respect. I expect, I was thinking yesterday as I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have, how do you know when you have a strong culture? And one of the ways you know is that you all love each other. I know that sounds weird coming out of a baby boomer's mouth. What would be one of those tests of, do I have a strong culture? If someone in your organization is sick, do you care about that? Or are you angry they can't come to work? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a 20th century culture. Oh, nobody's there to build the widgets today. A 21st century culture would think, yeah, I hope they're going to be okay. And what can I do? That's what I talk about when I talk about those middle tiers of Maslow's hierarchy. If I'm the leader of an organization and I die, do the people care? Or like, oh my God, he's finally gone. That's the difference when I think about a coaching culture and a 21st century culture that will attract a millennial MBA like you and those coming after you. Because the Gen Zs are in the workplace already. They're in college or they're working.
Yeah, and I guess part of it also is, the type of economy and the, like, we're in government contracting and providing services and technology. And if we were like, we need to develop, 20 widgets per day. And then, so I need to work twice as many hours if the other person's not there. But there's more flexibility in technology and things like that, because it's more about planning and organization. And even if you lose some productivity, if you still have, other things laid out and you have a good implementation, you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
Yeah, but I think if your culture's strong enough, those, the widgets that guy would have made on the day he's sick. His fellow workers are going to pick up the slack. He's going to come in and do his part when he does get well. So I think it all makes up for itself, even in that kind of widget making economy, rather than you and I in a support services.
It definitely aids like the development of a culture, I think, if you don't have so many physical or like concrete limitations around like having that satisfaction of choosing how you do things is part of a good culture, I think.
So you think about all the people that we're coaching that are transitioning, what would be some advice you would give them?
I mean, the number one thing is just, reaching out to other people, I think. Especially, it can even be people that you talk to all the time, but you haven't really introduced this problem or, this particular perspective to that person. So maybe they have a fresh take on it. So if you have brothers and sisters and your parents and, people from work, kind of coming to them and saying, have you dealt with something similar to this? And I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's where I would start at least.
Yeah. I think probably one of the more important exercises, and a coach can help you with this, a coaching leader can help you with this, is what are the actual opportunities available to you? We call it widening the realm of possibilities. Because I think a lot of us get stovepiped in our thinking that, okay, I'm transitioning and here's where all my friends went, so this is where I'll go. I was coaching someone who was retiring from law enforcement background, and him and 10,000 of his closest friends retire from that same field every year. So it's a crowded labor market to go do things that law enforcement people do when they retire. That drives down the labor rates, that drives down, I think, joy. You're going to continue doing the same thing you just retired from. So what else might be available to you other than what all of your friends did? So yeah, take some time to explore what are the realms of my possibilities. Have long conversations with your loved ones, like I'm sure you and Lena are going to have, about what's best for us.
So, for example, Lena was talking about some of her family wants to come to the States potentially. And so she asked, okay, like, have you been studying English? Some of them are like, no, I don't want to learn English. So it's like, okay, step one, learn English. So it's like, sometimes there's things that you can do right now that are going to help your possibilities in the future. And
yeah, that's a great point. And that's why when we talk to people in transition, we say, where do you want to be in 30 years? And at first that freaks people out. You're 30 years old. You don't even want to think about 60-year-old Lucas. But if you're there, you probably want to have prepared for it. And so no matter what age you are, 30 years from now, you want to be happy. You want to be surrounded by people who love you. You want to have probably some financial success. You want your health. And so, yeah, what can you do today to make that happen? It gets more real at the 5 years. Where do you want to be when you're 35 years old? I asked myself that question when I was 35. I said, well, I'll be 40 without a PhD, or I'll be 40 with a PhD. And it makes sense for me. So my 5-year plan when I was 35 was go get a PhD. But what do you have to do today and within the next year and within the next 5 years to be on that path? So I know you and our family, we're a really strong family. So I could guess where you want to be in 30 years. And what are you doing to take actions to make that happen today, this year, in the next 5 years? Because you don't wake up one morning and have an MBA, right? You got to apply to the school. We got to go to the classes. But what did the MBA do for you? I'm sure you asked yourself questions. You and Lena asked each other questions. What's next for us? So I suspect it fit into your life plan somehow.
I mean, to be completely honest, 3 years ago, I was kind of at the point where I was thinking like, okay, I want to expand those opportunities and the possibilities, and I'll figure it out. By the time I graduate, I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it. And now I'm at that point, and I'm like, okay, now it's time to figure out what I'm going to do with it.
Oh, that's cool.
What you were saying earlier, it kind of reminds me of like financial planning and, or even like, medical treatment. It's like if there's a patient that's bleeding, it's like, okay, stop the bleeding, then do this, then do this. Or if you're trying to save up, but you have a bunch of credit card debt, it's like, okay, stop the bleeding, figure out the credit card debt. But when it is like, mid-tier of the needs hierarchy, there's nothing like severely wrong. So you're almost just, like trying to guide yourself towards options that are all positive in a way. So I think that's a challenge.
So what would be the opposite of guiding yourself in the right direction?
I guess the good thing about, or at least just achieving anything is that you had to change or you had to change your habits or, you grew or developed. So at the very least, I mean, it's not impossible, but at the very least, it's harder to kind of like go back to how you used to act or like what you used to do. So that's like you've got that forever. I feel like.
So, what is one of your secrets to success, Mr. MBA?
I feel like I keep reiterating, and like we kind of talked about it previously, you and I, but like having that feeling of trying something new and like being in this state of frustration or feeling like you're not making progress, just keep going at least for a little while and look back on yourself because you have been making progress. If you are doing the right things and dedicating any sort of time and effort to something, you're going to see these things jump out at you, and other people are probably seeing it more than you do. So
yeah, I loved your story you told today about your Spanish fluency. You've been studying Spanish most of your life, thinking that you're okay at it, and then visiting your family in Colombia, them telling you how well you were speaking. Yeah, we don't get to see ourselves grow like other people do. So it's always nice to get that kind of feedback. And the other part of that came to mind while you were saying that is, if you are in fact a lifelong learner, you're also a lifelong novice. And all the frustrations that come along with being a novice at anything, like your guitar playing, right? Not advancing as quickly as you'd like, but you're still sticking with it.
When you're really like a novice, or maybe you're like younger, like, you're just graduating high school or something, it's easier to compare yourself to other people because, everyone's the same age, everyone's doing the same thing. But then when the time horizon gets longer and you see like, okay, like I was the slowest person in cross country, but now I can run a marathon. And so it's like, you will get there. Like if you are interested and you keep going.
So. Yeah. It's the rule of 72 that we talk about all the time. If you divide the growth rate of something into the number 72, it tells you how long it takes to double. And so if you're an okay runner and you get 5% better every year, you divide that into 72, how long is it going to take you to be a really good runner, right? It's so long way of saying continue to invest in yourself, and the person you were 5 years ago, you won't even recognize 5 years later.
So if you were talking to like that Marine transitioning to his first officer role or something, like one of those events, what would you say to that person, and how do you think it might have changed things in the past for you?
Yeah, I always hesitate to go back because if one thing changes in your whole life, you're not sitting here today. Right? And so I'm always very careful to say, gosh, I wish this would have been different. But, now that I'm 60 and have all these scars and all these successes, I would probably tell 30-year-old me, you're going to figure it out and it's going to be great. Just keep pushing, keep hammering away. Some of the more surprising things in my life were you go into, like you getting your MBA, you go into that school thinking, yeah, I probably can survive this, but I'm just going to do okay. And I'm surrounded by people that are more capable and smarter than I am. But then when you're on this journey and you see the timeline, as you said, the horizon getting stretched a little bit, you see, wow, I am competitive and I am smart and I am hardworking. I wish I would have recognized that when I was 20 something. And now you and I try to teach people that. show people that.
Yeah. Put that on our, children, grandchildren,
Yeah, exactly.
coworkers.
Yeah, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing one of your children or grandchildren do something that you've taught them is the right thing to do. It's like, oh yeah, they were listening. All right, I'll let you go. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Well, that concludes this episode of Building a Coaching Culture. I truly hope that this episode was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Maybe stop and give us a rating or a review, and share this podcast with someone who might find it helpful as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.